Hi, this is your Swapnil Bhartia, and we are here at Open Source Summit in Vienna, Austria, and we have with us once again David Nalley, Director of Open Source Strategy and Marketing at AWS. David, it's great to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me again. I feel like the last time we talked, we were in Seattle, which I think of as a rainy place, but it was really sunny then, and then we come here to Vienna and it's raining. So a very weird transposition of weather expectation.
Interestingly, it has literally no impact on the crowd. People
No,
are here, folks are here, which also brings me to the very first question, which is how has been your experience here in Europe, open source AWS?
so getting here didn't seem to be much of a problem. Walking around the city is perhaps not as enjoyable because there's some high winds and there's some rain. But you're right, people have showed up. I heard yesterday of some developers who were trying to come down on trains, and their train was delayed. So some of them took cars, others got a flight. And so, I've been very happy with the folks who've shown up because you would not know that there's inclement weather outside based upon the crowd that's here.
Now, when we look at AWS and when we look at open source, you folks use a lot of open source, you contribute a lot of open source, but we don't get to hear a lot about that. So can you just give us an update on open source and AWS?
Sure. So from our earliest days, and I mean truly the earliest days, 2006, when we launched the first service, open source was at the core. Uh, just like everyone else in the modern tech industry, we built atop open source and we use that heavily. In 2006, we were building S3, and we originally built that atop Apache Tomcat. And so we've been longtime consumers, just like anyone who's building modern software applications. We're building that atop open source software. Uh, at the time, it was really noticeable, and there was actually some mainstream press articles about Amazon, the broader Amazon company, not just AWS, adopting Linux at scale. And so, again, longtime consumers, and we continue to take advantage of the fact that we can accelerate the time to delighting our customers by using open source and not having to reinvent everything. And so, that has perhaps been the earliest interaction around open source. We quickly learned that when there were things that we needed to improve, or when we wanted to add features, that the fastest way to do that was to contribute. And there's a lot of history of Amazon. There's a lot of different companies. That means the relative comfort that Amazon and AWS has really depends on the type of business that's actually operating. And Amazon has a lot of different business types inside it. But from an AWS perspective, we've been working for the past 7 years, long before I joined the company. There's been folks who have been working on making it easier to contribute. And today, most software engineers inside AWS can contribute to open source software, and they can submit patches and bug fixes with literally zero approval. There's essentially a very low friction pre-approval path that says, if this is under an open source license and it's something that we're using and you want to improve upon it, you can go do that. That's been a change that we've made, but what we wanted to do is accelerate our ability to contribute to upstream open source software projects. And I think over the past 4 or 5 years, you've started to see us, in addition to consuming and contributing to open source projects that we consume, is to release some open source software and launch projects on our own. And so whether that's Cedar, which is a policy language and a policy framework that has the benefit of formal verification, or if it's Firecracker or Bottlerocket, which provide some container services to allow you to run things in a relatively lightweight and secure manner, are a number of our security tools that we've worked on, including working on things with others like the Open Cybersecurity Framework, where we recognized that there was not a lingua franca of the output of security tools, and we wanted to share that across different security tools. So we worked together with Splunk to launch that. So the past 4 or 5 years have really seen an uptick in us actually pushing out software.
Now, can you talk about some of the projects, open source projects that you folks are deeply involved with? Either we can talk about the contribution, of course we can talk about Valkey, also we'll talk about it separately, but just talk about some of the major projects where AWS is involved with.
We're involved in hundreds or thousands of projects. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you about the things that excite me most. Not the full picture, but it's the places that I'm really excited that we're contributing, and I'm really enjoying seeing the impact that we're having. So the first is PostgreSQL. The Postgres community is amazing and it's vibrant. And a number of years ago, we recognized that Postgres was an important database engine for many of our businesses. And AWS set up a dedicated team of people who their primary job function is to work on upstream Postgres. There are lots of people inside AWS who also, as another extended duty, contribute. But these people, their function at AWS is to contribute to Postgres, and so they're doing everything from release management to contributing features. And one of the things that they worked on recently were some changes because of glibc. If you ran and built Postgres with a different version of glibc, you might get different sort results. And it's something that we discovered operating Postgres at scale, and spent a lot of time focused on fixing that problem so that there was greater portability. And you can move to different versions of glibc, even different versions of Postgres, and end up with the same query results. That was a bug. It's in many ways it's a trivial bug, but it's a bug nonetheless that was impacting folks and causing some concern about the reliability of data results coming out of Postgres. And so, we ended up having a number of folks jump on that and work on that. There's a lot of other things, whether it's trusted language extensions, which is something that AWS released to work with Postgres and improve the security of folks who are running extensions atop the Postgres environment, and tons of others. I think the last time I saw the numbers, AWS was the number 3 largest contributor of code to Postgres, but they were the number 1 reviewer of patches. And I was really excited about that because, it's one thing to throw code at a project, but you really need people paying attention to what's going in. And doing code review is a thankless job because nobody, at least to my knowledge, nobody is saying, hey, you did a great job reviewing 15 patches this month. We're gonna give you promotion for that. Nobody's looking at that. We tend to obsess about things like lines of code contributed, or maybe really forward-thinking lines of code deleted. But lines of code reviewed is not really a metric for most software developers. So one of the folks in the Postgres community published research that showed that AWS was the number 1 reviewer of pull requests. And I'm thrilled to see that, because that suggests that we are helping to foster a vibrant community. It's not going to be all us. We don't want it to be all us, but we're excited to have some leadership there. I'll give you one other example, and that is the work that we're doing in the Rust programming language. And so, again, in another situation where we've got a set up similar to what I just described with Postgres. While we have lots of people that use Rust and lots of folks who are sending up bug fixes and features, we have a dedicated team of people working on Rust, and they're working on improving stability and improving performance, and folks are doing a lot of the chop wood carry water work that allows the Rust community to continue to progress.
These days, one of the hottest topic, or it was last year, is Gen AI. Can you talk about if there's any work going on from because AWS, you folks offer, a lot of it from Gen AI and open source perspective that you are aware of?
Sure. So, the entire open source AI environment is really not well defined at the moment. There's lots of concern around what elements of an AI system are required for it to be actually open source, and we have some opinions on that. We're not at this point at this stage. We aren't releasing any models that we would describe as open source. We have a number of models that are free to use. We're trying to hold a high bar on what we define as open source AI. And so I don't know that there's anything that we would readily describe there. We have been doing some interesting work with some of our open source tooling. So Q Code Transform, which is part of the Q portfolio of AI services that AWS offers. Q Code Transform is designed to allow you to do lots of refactoring very quickly and in an automated fashion. And so if you can imagine going from Java 8 to Java 17 or Java 8 to Java 21 is something that has historically been a non-trivial amount of work. And it's, again, that thankless work that is kind of a grind. And instead of doing that, Q Code Transform uses systems, and one of the systems that they're using is a project called Open Rewrite that's now at the Common House Foundation. As part of the system that helps to automate transformations like moving from Java 8 to Java 17. In addition, it has it uses artificial intelligence to first instrument tests across the code base, because we want to know that the things work before we try and actually transform it to a new variant of Java. And so adding code tests to a body of code, and then from there also taking on the actual transformation to Java 8 to 17 and ensuring that those code samples pass. And we've seen that speed up a lot of work inside Amazon. We have a lot of Java code that underlies our services. And so we've seen that people using that to be able to take advantage of the massive performance gains that we're seeing in the modern versions of Java that just aren't there in Java 8. And so Q Code Transform uses some of those open source tools, and we're contributing to Open Rewrite as part of our investment there. And we're seeing things like that where we're making use of open source as part of some of our AI tooling. But again, I don't think we're going to be describing any of our models that we're releasing as open source, because we want to keep a high bar on that definition.
And also, I talked to OSI a couple of weeks ago. They are coming up with, defining, because open source and Gen AI is not as easy as lamp stack. There are 4 components. So yes, it is challenging, and it's better to wait for, to create the proper definition versus open washing, because that does more damage than good.
I think it creates confusion, and that's something we want to certainly be wary of. In many ways, software is a little simpler, and frankly, when we created the open source definition, we were primarily thinking, and I wasn't around for creating the open source definition, but the open source community was primarily concerned about copyright at the time because that was the big concern. And instead of taking all of the other opens, I really like the Open Infrastructure Foundation. They talk about 4 different opens, right? And included among those are open governance and open development. Those were not really concerns at the time that things like the Debian free software guidelines or the open source definition were drafted. And one of the constraints on sharing and being able to help other people with software was copyright. And these licenses allowed folks to be able to share and redistribute and make modifications. And so a lot of the early framing, I think the open source community has matured a little bit. We certainly heard that in the keynotes today where people were talking about, it's not enough to just have an open source license. You probably want open source, open governance. You probably want development to happen in the open. So we have a little bit of that. But also software really has just 2 mediums. We have source code and we have binaries. And that's also not true for open source AI systems.
Yeah, if you look at even we go back to FSF, copyright and copyleft was the only, and when it comes to whole AI, Gen AI, I think one of the biggest challenges is data also. Companies are ingesting data. Now, ironically, when I put something on the web, it is in public, but it's not public domain. If you remember early days, that's why Creative Commons came out,
Yes.
That even if I release something under Creative Commons, can you make a derivative work or not? Is it for commercial or not? So yes, it is very, very sensitive. So I'm really happy to see where instead of saying, yes, we are doing open, you're like, we have to tread very carefully because it's not as easy as copyleft versus copyright.
I do think that our focus is we don't want to confuse our customers. Because today, if I tell you that something is open source, like I say Apache Hadoop is open source software, most people have an understanding of what they can do, which is they can use the software for any purpose. They have an understanding of the restrictions, and there aren't a whole lot in open source software. I'm not sure that that's true of a lot of the AI systems that are currently wearing that open source label today. And so the primary thing from an AWS perspective is we want to make sure that our customers understand the obligations that follow these systems. We don't want to confuse them. We don't want them to be surprised when they run into a restriction that wouldn't apply to open source. And so I'm actually, from a customer's perspective, I want to make sure that people understand what they're actually using and the terms under which they use it. And so minimizing that confusion is, I think, where we're landing on trying to maintain a high bar for what we describe as open source AI.
Now, let's talk about one of the projects that was announced earlier this year, Valkey. And it is making tremendous progress, great adoption, new releases also out. Just talk a bit about how you have seen that project evolve in such a short time, and because we have not seen such a growth of a project, open source project in such a short time.
Real briefly, Valkey is a fork of the Redis key value store. And a lot of people use that for caches or for in-memory database. And it had a long storied history. There was a license change on the Redis database, and that license change made it a non-open source piece of software. And so a number of the contributors, including multiple maintainers, decided they wanted to continue to work on an open source project. They wanted the software to continue to be open source. They forked that. That project became known as Valkey. It moved to the Linux Foundation, where it has neutral governance and independence from vendor control. And Valkey has become an important software project to AWS. We're investing there. We're hiring folks to work on Valkey. There's a Valkey booth, and there's some folks from Oracle I've seen, there's some folks from Google, and there's some folks from AWS at that booth. And so today we announced, the Valkey project announced version 8.0. And so this is the first major release since the fork. They've had they have had releases previously, but it was not a major release. And so this is version 8.0. It contains a number of improvements. The biggest one in my mind are some of the performance improvements that have come down. I was listening to Dirk Hondel talk about what he had seen in his tests, where he's seeing north of 20% improvement for large databases, and we're confident that there's improvements that are allowing a million requests per second to be handled, which is a substantial step up in performance for Valkey. I'm also really excited that this community has come together so quickly. We're talking a matter of months that we went from launch of this new project at the Linux Foundation, which happened in just over a week. They produced releases, and they've had several releases that have been patch level releases and maintaining compatibility with older versions of Redis. And then now we're really 5 months into the project, and they released their first major release with significant performance improvements, with new features. And the pace that this project has had is just mind-boggling to me. And so I'm super excited by the inertia that seems to be behind this project. They're moving really quickly, and they're delivering a lot of value to users who want to still consume an open source in-memory database.
And I actually loved when you said we and us and you stuff. But that is the beauty of open source as well, because all of us who are part of the community, we not only feel it's not ownership in the term of I own it, it's ownership. I'm responsible for it. I am like, come to me, ask the question, I'll be contributing. So that is the beauty. And as you mentioned, at the booth also, the open source brings all these different. Their sales and marketing team may compete, but the developers, they work together to improve the product. So that is the real beauty of open source. That's why I love this community that much.
Yeah. I'm here talking to you representing AWS, which is why I said not we, because it's not AWS. It's not just AWS. There is a vibrant community around there, and I want to be careful to not speak for that community, because I'm here working for AWS. I am part of that community, but I am not the community. And I really am just fascinated and impressed by the community that has risen up. They're doing really hard work. They're developing features. They're dealing with security issues. They are working on maintaining backwards compatibility, and just a ton of work that's gone into it that you would have expected that to have taken years in most projects. So really excited. There's a lot of things happening there, and Valkey is a place where I'm impressed by how much the open source spirit and culture is dominating the project.
Anything else that you feel like, hey, Swapnil, we should talk about that, or you think that we have hit all the main points that you wanted to hit today?
The other big announcement that we made today is the launch of the OpenSearch Foundation. And so OpenSearch was launched as a fork of Elasticsearch. We launched that in 2021. And that also came about because of a license change. AWS has been acting as the steward for OpenSearch. And even though we've had maintainers from other companies, and we set up in the past year a leadership committee to help guide the project, effectively it was still an AWS run project. And a lot of the feedback that we've been hearing from our customers and our partners and the users of the project is that they would like to see more neutral governance and essentially some protection from what ended up being arbitrary decision making by the previous steward of the project. And so today we announced the formation of the OpenSearch Foundation, and that had AWS, SAP, and Uber as the premier members, and I believe 9 others, 9 general members joining that. And so there's a technical steering committee, there's a governing board, and that governance has transitioned now to the normal patterns that you would expect out of a foundation from the Linux Foundation. And I'm super excited about that. It's been a long time in coming. We've been listening to customers for a long period of time, and they've been consistently asking for this. And over the past year, we've been actively working towards chasing all of the approvals inside AWS, making sure we had all of the intellectual property processes well documented and figured out so that we could make this transition relatively painless.
One thing that I like about Linux Foundation is that when we talk about this foundation of foundations, that's what it is, that they have their own independence. Just Linux Foundation, they provide a lot of resources, but those foundations also, they're not driven by the organizations behind them. It's, yes, you mentioned technically. So they have very good organized structure also. Their code is controlled by the community. So can you also talk about, because sometimes folks don't understand, they will say, oh, AWS is putting resources on Microsoft or Oracle, that means they are controlled, but that is not the case. So can you also talk a bit about the kind of independence of these foundations?
One of the beauties of open source foundations is this degree of independence that they have and neutrality. And those two things are very powerful when coupled. So anyone can come contribute to, participate in, and ultimately take a leadership position in an open source foundation. And that's a feature. We want that to happen. The fact that it is a dedicated foundation and has governance that's set up to invite other people into it essentially provides you a situation where a single company cannot dominate the decision making. And so whether that's the technical decisions around the code that's being handled by the technical steering committee, or issues like trademarks that is typically handled by a governing board, the relative neutrality and independence of the foundation means that the community at large has to come together to make decisions, and that no single actor on their own can essentially usurp power. And I think that's actually one of the values that we get out of open source foundations, is they give us both that neutrality and that independence for a project.
David, once again, thank you so much for joining me today, and walk us through open source at AWS and all the projects that you folks are contributing to. So thanks for great insights, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you again here at the conference, and I hope we see a lot more of each other in the future.